This video is just to give you an overview of the history and importance of Rome. What was it? How did it begin? How did it rise to power? What was their sphere of influence? How did it fall? Why was it important then? Why is it important now? First thing to note is that Rome was big. At the height of its power, it took over most of Europe, some of the Middle East, and a little bit of North Africa by the Mediterranean. That was its occupied area, but that was not as far as they reached. They had merchants sailing to India. We have records of them going all the way to China. We have Chinese documents who speak of a great empire to the west, clearly talking about Rome. We know that they went way down past the equator. So when we look not just at the land they occupied, but the area that they influenced, it really does take over almost an entire hemisphere of the globe. They were big. How do they begin? So let's go way, 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 way back in the past. 14,000 years ago. How about that? That's pretty far. We know that humans have been living in the Mediterranean thousands of years. This is a beautiful spot. It's warm. It has plenty of food. There are lots of caves, natural limestone caves in the area, perfect for human habitation. It's hard to figure out when they arrived because people still live in Rome. It's hard to do archaeology under someone's house. They don't like that. But from the archaeology that we can do, we know that it was at least 14,000 years ago and probably earlier than that. We don't start thinking about Romans and the people until probably around 753 BCE. Legend says that Rome was founded by two brothers, Romulus and Remus. Romulus killed his brother over a dispute over which of those 7 hills the city would be founded upon. He later became the king of this area, and there were 7 kings in total, over 250 years or so, which makes these kings, if you do the math, makes these kings have very long lifespans. The first 4 were fairly good kings. They did everything that they needed to do. They weren't Romans. They didn't all come from the city. In fact, most of them came from the surrounding area. But the last 3 kings, they came from an area up north called Etruria, and they were so bad. They abused their power so badly that the Romans in the area, they decided that something must be done, and they ousted the king and formed a new form of government, and that was called the Republic. The Republic is a form of government where you elect leaders from the people to represent you. So we are a republic because that's what we do. We don't go to Congress. We elect people to go to Congress in our stead. Theirs was a little different. Only taxpayers, only citizens were allowed to vote, and their voting was very complicated. High-class citizens voted first, and they were able to monopolize the vote. And so most of the time, the candidates that won were the favorites of the high class and not necessarily of the low class, which became a problem later on. But they fixed that. The Republic is very responsive to problems, and they were able to add new offices so that these people low down on the class totem pole could get represented as well. Lots of offices were available, just like we have lots of offices now. We elect the sheriff of the town as well as the school board, and not just presidents. We elect all sorts of leaders to represent us. And the Republic lasted about 500 years. And what happened is that this guy, Julius Caesar, came in and kind of screwed everything up. The past 100 years before him weren't the best. Things were going not so great with the Republic. There was lots of civil war, lots of strife. The power of the Republic was waning anyway, so Julius Caesar just was able to capitalize that. He was a great general. He had conquered lots of land for Rome, and he comes back into Rome, and he sees a power vacuum, and he's able to capitalize on that, and he is announced as the dictator, first for a year, which was common, and then for, I think it was 5 years, and then after that he was named dictator for life. being a dictator, being the sole ruler, the one person who has all of the power, that sounds a lot like a kingship. And many of these older Republicans who idolized the way that they had a responsive government, they thought back to when Rome had a king and how terrible it went. And they hated the idea of being ruled by one man. And so they formed a conspiracy and they assassinated Julius Caesar with the idea that it would bring back the Republic. It did not, mostly because of this guy, Augustus. Augustus was Caesar's nephew, and when Caesar was assassinated, he was named in the will as his heir. Augustus and Caesar's other friend, Mark Antony, riled the crowd up, and they convinced the people of Rome that this was a terrible thing, that Caesar actually had been working for the people and not for himself. And public opinions quickly swayed against the conspirators, and then another civil war started, and Augustus won. Being Caesar's heir, he was able to command the power of Rome. He called himself the emperor, which is not a new word in Latin. The word imperator just means general, and they held basically the same power as a kingship. There were good emperors, like Augustus. He was actually a good guy, and Rome flourished. Augustus, he bragged that when he came to Rome, he found a city of brick, and when he left Rome, he left a city of marble. But sadly, there were way more bad emperors than good ones. You may have heard the saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that is what happened. Lots of emperors abused their power. Lots of emperors were assassinated. Lots of political intrigue as people tried to jockey for power. Throughout this, Rome still was able to grow in size and influence, but it was not because of the emperors, it was really despite them. Things got so bad and so hard to manage that Rome was divided into two kingdoms, an Eastern Emperor and a Western Emperor. And you could see things starting to literally fracture. And in 410 CE, Rome was sacked by these people called the Goths. They were a tribe of Germanic people. They took the city, and basically Western Rome fell. Eastern Rome still was around. Nowadays we call it Byzantium, but they didn't call it Byzantium. They called it Rome because it was. Byzantium maintained a lot of that Roman heritage, but because it was located in the east, people mainly spoke Greek. Latin was still used in the legal codes, but Greek was the lingua franca, was the daily language. Eventually, Christianity was adopted, and later on in the 800, 900, and 1000 CE, it became a stopping point. Byzantium became a very important stopping point for the Crusaders. It was one of the major reasons why the Muslims were not able to push into Europe through the Eastern. And sadly, after 1,000 years after the fall of Western Rome, the capital of Eastern Rome, capital of Byzantium, Constantinople, it was finally sacked and taken over by the Ottoman Empire in 1453, thus ending Roman rule, but not ending the Romans. Even though Byzantium was taken over and effectively Rome doesn't exist anymore, the people of that area, they continued to call themselves Roman for centuries. After the Byzantine Empire fell, the people of Greece, they called themselves Roman. It wasn't until the 1830s, when Greece became an independent state, that they now forged a new identity, dropping that Roman name and calling themselves Greek for basically the first time. 1830. So we started 14,000 years ago with first habitation, all the way up to 1830. The people of this area have been a huge influence throughout history, throughout Western history at least. So why did it last so long? Why was it so powerful? Well, Rome was able to conquer and control one of the largest empires in history, mainly because of the Roman ideas of duty, of honor, of structure. They created the first effective professional trained volunteer army. Before that, you would be drafted in the army. If you were a farmer, you might be given a sword, but most likely they'd say, bring your pitchfork, you're coming with us, and you're going to war. Rome created a volunteer army where they were paid, and that was their job. They didn't go off to be farmers half the year and come back and be soldiers the rest. Nope, that was their job. The genius of Rome is that when they saw something that worked, right, their empire was so vast that they had lots of influences coming from lots of different places. And when they saw something that made sense to them, they took it and then they perfected it. When we think about Rome, we might think about things like the arch or the road or concrete. If you know anything about Rome, those three things and the army are probably the four things that really stand out to you. They didn't invent the arch, but they perfected it. They saw how powerful it was, and they created something that worked for them. They didn't invent the road, but they used it effectively. They welcome foreigners, they welcome their ideas, and they welcome their gods. Rome was polytheist, and they didn't really have a problem with other people worshiping other gods. They just said, oh, that you worship Baal? He's a lot like Jupiter, so we're going to just assume that you're worshiping Jupiter under a different name. It wasn't a big deal for them. How does this apply to us right now? Well, the ideas and the institutions of the Romans were so well known through history that they've been copied over and over and over again. Some of you may have been to Washington. There's a Capitol building right there. The very top is a huge dome. A dome, which we'll see eventually, is just an arch turned 360 degrees. And this was able to free up a massive amount of space. Again, Romans didn't invent it, but they used it. The very front of this building has all those columns. It very much looks like a Roman and Greek style temple. We look at the Supreme Court building. That totally is a Greek and Roman temple right out of history, other than the fact that it is kind of boring and it wasn't painted bright, vibrant colors. In fact, this woman over here, Blind Justice, she is a Roman goddess. Stay in Washington, and we have the Jefferson Memorial. This is nearly exact copy of the Pantheon, which is a Roman temple to all the gods in Rome. Again, you see that dome. Again, you see the columns. The flag of Virginia is one of my favorite all-time flags. It shows a soldier in very Greek-style clothing with a Corinthian-style helmet, standing over a dead guy with a crown thrown off its side. And underneath it says, Sic semper tyrannis, which means thus always to tyrants. So I think it's the only flag I've ever seen that's got a dead guy on it. But apparently the Virginians, they thought that they valued freedom so much that they were going to put it right on their flag. We go to Boston, and we go to Bates Hall, which is Boston Public Library. And you see that the huge space opened up by the arch. Universities. As you may already know, many universities throughout history, they started off only teaching in Latin, and that is it's obviously they don't do that anymore, but because they started off as places where Latin was spoken, their mottos are in Latin, and so we have the sigil for Brown University, and its motto is In Deo Speramus, which means we hope in God. And even over here, even the institute, the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, even they, a fairly new school, deemed it appropriate to have their motto in Latin. And their motto is Mens et Manus, which means by mind and by hand. And then lastly, the Constitution. Many of the ideas of laws that we follow right now were either inspired by or copied from Roman law. And lastly, we have the American military, its order, discipline, the way units are regimented. All of this hails back to thousands of years of military traditions stemming from the Roman legion. This was a broad overview, fairly fast. Hopefully this served as some sort of a way for you to understand that Rome, even in the 21st century, is still around. It's still kicking. It's still important.